Hello and welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're taking a look at a product from Kreg Tool, and that is this blue aluminum track that you see here. This is their top track, if you will. And so this is designed for, among other uses, for setting up a miter saw station. So this comes nicely packed in these little tubes with screws and installation instructions on how to set it up. And you can also buy, which is sold separately, tape that either goes left to right or right to left to be able to mark how far it is from the saw blade, as well as a swing stop that has a little eye on it here that lines up with the tape that you can use to be able to mark relative positions and swing out of the way for making cuts at your miter saw. So how to set this up is going to vary a little bit based on the saw that you specifically have. So let me show you what I've done here for my saw. So I've got an older Porter cable saw, and I built some extensions at the same height as my table that go out to the end of the bench that it's mounted on. If you want to know more about this Ultimate Power Tool workbench, I'll put a card up in the corner. I got a video from a few years ago about what this is and how I made it. And so I've got one to the left, and I've got another one over here to the right that's the same exact height as the table on the miter saw. A couple of things you need to pay attention here is some miter saws, like mine, have an adjustable wing fence here that you can move out of the way. So if I'm making a bevel cut, I would have to swing this. Let me just pull that out of the way here. And that would have to come back like that. So I obviously haven't bolted this down to my workbench yet, but it's going to be important that you're aware of any little quirks like that with your saw, because I'm actually going to end up just getting rid of this extra piece here as an extension. I don't think I need it really. Since my saw is bolted down, I'm not really worried about that. You'll have to make that call in your specific case. And so for the height of this fence, the guiding principle that I used was I looked at this specific swing stop that I decided to use. At what height does it bottom out? So that if I've got something really skinny on here, that I'm still going to be flush up against this unless it's really too thin, or not very deep, I mean, because there's a small little air gap in the back there, because I want this will swing all the way and touch the back of the fence and skate just ever so slightly on top of the bottom. And so that was my criteria on how high I wanted this fence, because if it was any higher than that, the material, especially like some plywood, could just slide right under it or some molding. I didn't really want that. And then the other decision you have to make up on your mind is you can put together these swing stops where the bolt down side is either to the left or to the right of the stop. So obviously there's some pros and cons. So in this case here, on the left side, this brings my stop closer to the saw, but limits how far out it can go to this side. And so there's some trade-offs for what you may want to do, and you may decide to have one or the other. And so what I've decided to do is I'm going to have one on this side, one on the other side set mirrored to this one. And if I need to flip-flop them, I can, but otherwise I'll set up the tape here measured from here to the specific position of my blade on my saw, which that's all going to vary based on your specific saw and your situation for what you are trying to match this with here. And so the other thing to pay attention to is this blue aluminum track is cuttable with most woodworking blades. I probably wouldn't use a really, really expensive blade, but woodworking blades work fine for cutting aluminum track. And then you'll just want to be able to pre-drill the holes and then drop in the slots there. And so I thought this was an easy upgrade to enhance the functionality of my miter saw station, because I've found myself over the last few years just building ad hoc things going, oh, I'll get to this, I'll get to this, I'll get to this. This was something I intended to get to several years ago, but just now I've gotten around to of having a little bit of extra time to be able to catch up and get a few extra little odds and ends of things that are just nice to have. You don't have to have this, but I put this in the nice to have category. So just for some other hints, you may need to pay attention to for how you want to build an extension fence. So in mine, I had to specifically also notch away on the back side here to make room for cutouts on the back where the normal extension would go. You're going to customize that to your saw, and then I also put in little blocks here. So my table is actually dadoed into the vertical fence. And so this was all set up with some squares to make it all perfectly square. And I plugged up the middle to keep dust out from getting in, or worse yet, any rodents trying to get in there and try to hibernate for the winter. And so I got that plugged up on both ends. Plus, I think it looks nice, and I obviously painted it up because I just like things that look nice. So there's lots of ways to do this here. This is just how I did it. You can see where I've got that nice tight fit against the edge of my miter saw on the left and the right. So a little bit of carving, a little bit of crafting with a multi-tool may be called for to pair a table like this with your saw, but really easy upgrade, really easy to do. I will have to say that the total cost of this Kreg system is a little bit pricier than I would like. So on the back side of the fence here, there is a little groove here, which is where you want to be able to put in the anchoring screw to help to attach this to the fence. Now you're going to want to use an 1/8 inch drill bit to start a small pilot hole about 1 inch off of both ends and then evenly spaced, I don't know, every 6 to 8 inches, give or take, along the length of your fence. Obviously, it's going to vary based on the length. And then work your way down from either end, and then you should be good to go. Just be careful you don't over drill your pilot holes into the other side and come out the other end. So just be careful with that with your 1/8 inch drill bit. Just slightly beyond the depth of the metal fence is good enough. And then after you have your pilot hole, you can come back with the included screw and a Phillips head drill bit. And then go ahead and drop in your screw. Just like that. And there's the first screw. Lather, rinse, and repeat. So now when it comes to the flip stops, or swing stops as Kreg calls them, we're going to have some options. So let's take a look at all the parts that you get in the box. This case is a little bit of a pain to have to open because of the way that this blister pack is set up, with not a lot of room on the edge to open it up, but we can peel it back like this. And then we've got obviously the swing stop itself right there. And we've got, if we want to call it, the body of the swing stop. And then we've got a set screw. This little bag here is the little guide window, if you will. That'll show you the measurement. And then over here is the hardware. And we take a look at the hardware that we get. We've got some spacers, we got some nuts. Like this. So then for this kit here, depending upon which side you actually want this block on. So for this one, I'm going to be setting it up with the block on the right and the swing stop to the left. Then in this case, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be starting with the bolt, working from the bolt head towards what I'm going to call the inside. Start with a brass washer, and then there's going to be an insert. Find the right size insert here. Like this. There's a couple different sizes. We'll fit that one in. This bolt's going to go through here like this. Then on the other side, we're going to have the other insert. If you flip this over, you can see, there we go. That's how that goes, like that. And then now on this block, there's a couple different parts here. There's a larger hole and a smaller hole on the block. And so then the larger hole will go towards the rear, and the smaller hole will go towards the front. And so then we'll take the spacers here, the little plastic spacers, and put one in there, the other one in here like this. And then this is going to go like this. And then we'll put the brass spacer on the outside, and then the lock nut on the end. We'll have to come back with a wrench to tighten that up there. And then towards the middle, see, this one here doesn't have a hole through it. If you look at the spacer here, that will go right in here. Just press that in. Give it a Good press there. And by the time this is tightened up, that'll provide a nice uniform space like that. And then we have the T-nut that we'll put in through the bottom of the little side block, and then we'll put the little hand-tight washer on it like that, leaving us just with the side here to put our little sight window. And then now for this little sight window, you have some options with this to think about. You'll see how this can slide through here, so you can micro adjust exactly where this little red line comes up. And so this is going to need to go to the side opposite of this other lock block there, if you will. And there's a flat-headed screw here that goes through here. You can use to set that exactly where it is, so you can fine-tune this. So if your tape is off by just a little bit, you can come back and use a flathead screwdriver and move that little sight window just enough to bring that back into tolerance. And then now to tighten up the bolt here, I've got a 1/2 inch socket and a 1/2 inch ratchet. We can just tighten up this lock nut here a little bit. We don't need to make this super tight, but just enough to make sure that it all stays on and stays together nice and tight. It's probably about right. You want to have some room for this to be able to flip. And I might have over tightened that there just a bit. So I'll come back and back that off by just a hair, because I need there we go. So there's the edge there. And now our swing stop is together. Now for dropping this into the track, pay attention to the orientation of this T-nut that's under here, and to make sure that that's all lined up the way that you need it to drop in the track. If you're cutting down the track and then plan to use the scrap on another side of your setup here, this is what I did. I've got a small scrap section here next to a full-length section here. One of the things I found myself doing is having to file this down a little bit to make sure this edge is a nice clean joint between the two. It might not be perfect and pretty, but you want to get that as smooth and together as you can to make sure that your swing stop will slide freely across that section there. And then also, if you really want to pay attention to detail, on this cut section, I thought about how I cut the other one here to make sure that my ionized or the blue end is visible here, so I could hide the cut edge here in between these two pieces. So at least from the outside, you don't see the naked aluminum there. Just a little thing. I'm probably the only one that's ever going to notice that, but it just makes me feel just a little bit better inside that I got those little details right for getting this set up here. And now with the assembled swing stop, I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the track. And then now with this in the track here, I can bring this across here. My joint is smooth going to the right, but just a little bump going to the left. It's nothing I can't work with. I think that'll be fine. I might come back and file that down just a little bit on the inside there to try to remove that with a really small file, to try to do that with, to try to clean that up here. But otherwise, feels pretty good. And then the next thing after I got all this together here would be to screw these down. I'm going to use a long straight edge to make sure that the face of my fence on my miter saw and this new auxiliary fence I've added to it is perfectly parallel and in line with each other, so that I don't have any errors when I'm cutting long pieces of work. And the same is going to be true with the other side, using the longest straight edge that I've got possible to line everything up, clamp it down, and then screw these in place. In my case, I can screw these down from the bottom, coming back up. Obviously, the way that you build yours may vary for how you want to attach it. In theory, you could also drill some pocket holes and pocket hole it from the front or from the back to hold it down. I'm just going to drive my screws up from the bottom so the screws are completely out of sight. I don't have to look at those or have to patch up pocket holes on the backside. It's up to you for how you want to set that up. That's just going to be my tactic. Then after that, we'll be adding the measuring tapes. With a 4-foot level now spanning my miter saw and as much of this table as I can, I'm going to come back and check for any gaps along the miter saw fence or along the table here. And I can definitely see there's a gap back here. I could fit a feeler gauge down. So now I'll make a few adjustments to be able to bring the level flush with the fence on the miter saw and the new auxiliary table. I'll start with one side, then the other, but the other piece here, just to point out here, is I also started by having my miter saw bolted down to my workbench, and then everything is going to be based on that. After a few more adjustments, I got the gap between the level and the fences all cleared out to be as tight as I think I'm ever going to get it. And I came back and put a clamp over here and on the other side of my saw just to keep it moving around whenever I go to screw this down. And so I'm not really going to screw this down. I'm going to come from underneath here and then screw up into the bottom through my surface into the bottom of the table. I'll put probably 3 screws on my left side since it's slightly longer, and then I will lather, rinse, and repeat on the right side. So now I'm just going to get underneath here. I'm not going to show this here because it'd be really boring. Me screwing it on. The screws I'm going to use are going to be these structural screws. You don't have to get as fancy as this. I just happen to have a few of these left over because I bought, it was like a bucket of maybe, was it 200 of these about a year ago? And I've got about 20 or so of these left, so I'm just going to go ahead and use these up. This is a nice flange, and I know it'll be nice and strong and sturdy for securing this down to my workbench. All right, now after some additional tightening and the screws in place, we've got the left fence here secure. It moves only with the rest of the workbench. And then I've taken the level, moved over to the other side. I'm going to go ahead and tighten. I'm ready to tighten down the right table. And I've got this with all of the gap taken out between the level and the fence on the saw, and between the level and the fence on the extension wing. So we're closing in. We're in the home stretch for getting these Kreg top tracks here all fully installed on the miter saw. And now with both tables screwed down, it's time to move on to putting the measuring tape onto the track. You can see I've already put one of the stop blocks here. And remember, like I mentioned earlier, there is the little sight glass here that we can adjust to be able to fine tune this in the event we get the tape not quite perfect. We've got a little bit of room we can adjust this to be able to dial this right in. So now when I go to set this tape, I'm going to have to think about also the kerf width of my blade. So I'm going to do the left side first. So first remember Kreg has these 2 tapes, right to left and left to right. So I'll put the left to right on the right side of the saw and the right to left on the left side of the saw. Smooth that over like that so I don't get them confused. We'll take these out and then we'll lay them down here to try to get them in alignment. So now to measure the tape, I've got the tape here lined up. I've got my clamp down to help to hold this back against the fence. I went back and my saw here, what's about 14 inches. And now if I bring the blade down, you can see at this point here, the kerf of the blade is just to the left of the 0 mark. But then to account for the sight glass being off to the right, I'm going to scooch this tape over to the right about the kerf of the saw, so it measures left to right from the wrong side of the kerf of the saw, but that'll be made up by the sight glass here, so that if I put on a saw blade of a different kerf, I've got some adjustment room to be able to bring this back into being accurate for what the alignment is. And then, so then once I get that, then all I do is take a X-Acto knife here, or my scissors, and then cut it, and then lay it up on top. I've now cut my tape at the 11¼ inch mark, and that's going to correspond with where the edge of where the blue fence meets the edge right here. So I've snipped that down, and then I'm going to make sure that my T-track is nice and clean in this groove here. There's no extra dust. And then this is actually really nice because this feels almost like a tape measure. And we'll just peel back the paper here. Being careful to try to get as much of it back as we can. Starting on one end, I'm going to make sure I try to get it laid flat into the track. I don't want to have to move this more than I have to get this all lined up here. Now after applying the measuring tape on both sides here, we can see where I've got it all laid down here. I'd taken into account this extra gap on the right side. Made it a little more precarious for getting things lined up here, but it all works out. That continuous piece of tape does also bridge that gap between the two pieces of material here that I showed you earlier in this video. Makes it a little bit less of an eyesore. Still slight imperfections, but kind of helps to hide it. And then I can make some fine adjustments as turning that black screw there to adjust that sight glass to get it exactly dead on where it is. What makes this more complicated is the fact that that red line is offset from the actual edge of the stop block. So that's where like the curve of the blade comes into account for thinking about the offset of the tape. It just provides a little extra margin of error to be able to correct it. Also, in the event that there's any other thermal issues or anything else later, or other imperfections, to get it all laid out here. So come back to the other side here. We can bump this left to right. It sits a little funny, but when you tighten it down, it'll all square up here, and the stop block falls down positively there onto that auxiliary fence. And so now it's got a rigid stop there. Because one of the most important things in woodworking, sometimes it's not always being accurate, but being repeatable. And so this enables a level of repeatability and also offers some level of accuracy of getting everything set up pretty close and correct. This has been an upgrade I've been wanting to do for quite a while. It's done now. I feel pretty good about this here. One thing I wish I would have done would have been to add a little chamfer in that back groove between the horizontal and the vertical planes of the auxiliary fences to account for sawdust. I should have done that. I may come back later to do that. But one of the other things I have left over now is I do have some extra left over, that measuring tape. So I think it'll be interesting. I think I've got a pretty creative use for what we can use the scraps on that measuring tape, because Kreg provides a lot of extra tape, more than what's needed here for actual use on this fence here. So I'm going to take the scraps of that over to my toolbox. And then now I'm going to use the long top drawer here on my lower chest. I'll pull that out here. And then at least to me, that's going to make a perfect other place I can use up the rest of this tape. So now I've got a handy ruler that I can measure anything else I want with in the shop. Now, granted, it doesn't start at 0, but I can mentally adjust for that. That's not that big of a deal. So I can check screw length, bolt length, or anything else along this tape. This is just a straight up standard tape. And the scrap that I used was the one that measures from left to right. Obviously, if your mind thinks the other way, you could use the scraps left over the other way. In any event, Kreg gives plenty of excess material, more than is what's needed for at least the way that I built my miter saw station, and presumably the same. And I wanted to find a creative use for it, and I think this is it. So that's your look at the Kreg top fence for building a miter saw station. Any questions or comments, put it down below. Any other ideas on how to do this better? I would love to hear about it. Any other experiences? Again, please share it. Here to help everyone. And if you enjoy this kind of content, give it a thumbs up. If you like this content and want to see more of it, click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day. Bye.